Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt and I'm the host of the Stressed podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started. Hi everyone, and good morning and welcome to the podcast, Stressed. I'm really excited to sit here today with Eric Partaker. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Julia. Excited to be here, and thank you to everyone who's listening. Grateful for your time.
Yeah, we all are for sure. Eric, where are you based?
So I'm in London, so in the United Kingdom.
Nice.
But I'm a bit of an international mutt. So I'm half Norwegian, half American, live in London. My wife is Brazilian and speak 4 different languages at home. So it's kind of all over.
Wow. You said that you have a 7-year-old son. What kind of languages is he speaking already?
So he speaks Norwegian, English, French, and Brazilian Portuguese.
Wow. Okay. That's incredible. So he's a real peak performer already at 7 years old.
Yeah. He's multilingual. It's like, the United Nations. And then I have a 15-year-old as well, and he's also, speaking several languages. So it ends up being that way without really much effort when you're an international, family that's come together living in a place that neither of you are from, right? So then
you need to have all the languages. Yeah. That's great. That's awesome. Tell us a little bit more about you. What's your journey been like? And tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are.
Yeah, sure. So my journey's been it's been the embodiment of, so John Lennon had a quote, "Life is what happens while we're busy making other plans." And that's kind of feels like my journey. So none of it was really planned. I started off as a consultant with McKinsey and Company, then joined Skype. In its early days, we were about 30 or so people. We grew to around 500. We then had a sale to eBay for $4 billion. This is about 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And then I went into the restaurant industry. So I built up what became an award-winning chain of Mexican restaurants. Mm-hmm. Being half American, I had grown up on Mexican food in Chicago. So I was missing that. And so had a lot of fun with that journey and got to eat a lot of my favorite cuisine.
Nice.
Great.
And that was your own company that you built there? Okay.
Yeah. And the common kind of thread through it all, which is where I focus my attention these days, has been an obsession with Abraham Maslow's whole hierarchy of needs, and the idea that our path to deepest fulfillment comes from reaching our full potential. So and that for me is what I mean by peak performance. I talk about peak performance a lot, but peak performance for me simply means becoming all that you're capable of being in the areas of life that matter most to you. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's around kind of your health, your wealth, and your relationships. And here I am now. So now, I help entrepreneurs, founders, leaders, perform at a higher level in their work and life.
Mm-hmm. And I read on your homepage and your story that you experienced burnout as well at some point. So what was the journey like in terms of all of this sounds really beautiful and incredible, right? You were really successful. But where was that cut between, okay, this is all really great, but maybe I'm not taking enough care of my energy levels in order to sustain that performance?
Yeah. Well, and even before that, I'm glad you put it that way. It all sounds great and everything. So even, and I will get to what you're referring to, but even before that, I just wanted to clarify that, like McKinsey is known as a great place to work and all of that, but I had to fight my way to get in there. Mm-hmm. I went to a state university, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I didn't go to an Ivy League school, and there was 2,000 applicants for 22 positions in McKinsey's Chicago office, and 20 of the positions went to Ivy League schools, and I was like one of two, state university students who got a job offer. And I had to fight my way to get the job offer. I mean, one of the things that I had done was, I very strategically organized a field trip from my university to McKinsey for the finance club that I was a member of, specifically to be able to meet the head recruiter, and then found a way to practice, the particular interview style that they put you through on the side. So yeah, really, really had to fight my way in. Same with Skype. First time I applied for a role at Skype, I was told no. 3 months later, I applied again on Christmas Day, and and then they said, okay, you're persistent, and yeah, maybe we could use somebody with a business acumen. So then it became a yes. So I've just been very, very persistent, to get those things. But that persistence then kind of transformed into a really unhealthy, obsession with work. And I was working 100-hour weeks at McKinsey, mostly driven out of, it's easy for me to blame the culture, but it was really more a sense of inadequacy, myself. If I'm honest, the whole time I was there, although I had the right to be there, I was still questioning myself. Do I really have the right? And then trying to prove myself, right, by working extra hard. And I followed suit with that at Skype, working extra hard, and then with building, my own businesses. And it culminated with, I boarded a plane 10 years ago, and I was on a return flight to London. And once the plane had reached cruising altitude, I started to get a lot of pain in my chest. And then soon that pain became, a lot of pressure. Started to become nauseous, felt really sick. My colleague was sat next to me, Lewis, and I asked him to feel my left arm, just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. And then Lewis said to me, "Gosh, Eric, your arm feels like it's been hanging in a meat locker." And that's how it felt to me. It did not feel like it was part of my body. It was so ice cold. I remember feeling, and obviously I knew, that this was not looking good. And Lewis jumped over, ran to get the attention of a stewardess, who asked if there was a doctor on board. And what are the chances, right? So luckily for me, there was one. And the doctor came running up and took my vital signs, and then said, "We need to land the plane immediately. I think he's having a heart attack." And when you hear that 35,000 feet up in the air, I remember feeling, I was just terrified that my heart was going to stop right before we reached safety.
Yeah.
So, obviously the plane went into an emergency landing mode or whatever. And by the way, which I Googled afterwards, how much does it cost an airline? They have to do an emergency landing. And apparently it's about $150,000. And I only paid $150 for that ticket, so I don't think they did too well off of it.
Did they return to the airport that you left from?
No. So we were at this point, we were flying over France, so they emergency landed in France.
Okay.
There was an ambulance waiting. Runway was shut down. I think that's what really drives up the cost, right? If you have to shut down a runway. They took me into the ambulance, and they administered nitrates right away to open up, dilates basically all of your blood vessels, and increases the blood flow to the heart, which is what you want in a situation like that. And then when the ambulance sped off to the local hospital, I looked up into the eyes of the paramedic looking down at me, and I said, "Please don't let me die." I have a 5-year-old son. So, the son who I said is 50
Mm-hmm.
was 5. And I don't remember exactly what he said. It was something along the lines of, just take it easy. I think we got to you just in time, or, we're going to look after you, something along those lines. And I woke up the next day in the hospital, and that was, that was the realization that, have I really been successful? Like, really? Is this what success is? Like, to the point where it almost costs you your life, driven by ultimately you feeling inadequate and needing to kind of prove yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Is this what success should feel like if you suddenly worry about, never seeing, your only, well, at the time, my only child, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I started to, I wish I could say change happened right away. It didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I started to prioritize my health a lot more. I thought I was doing a better job, outside of work, not just being all about work. But my wife didn't think so. And, a few years after that, I remember waking up one morning and she had tears in her eyes, and she said she was leaving me if I didn't change my ways. So she said that, I was there, but I still wasn't really present.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the final wake-up call. So that's when I said, okay, it's these 3 pillars. We really need to, if we want to reach our full potential, peak performance for me is about operating as the best version of yourself, health-wise, wealth or work-wise, and relationship-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Because those were the 3 things in that story that really came together, right? So it was my health that made the plane land.
Mm-hmm.
It was the overworking, which led to that. But that obviously means work must have significance to me, even if I was approaching it wrongly.
Mm-hmm.
But yet the first words out of my mouth in the ambulance were, relationship related,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that for me is the 3-legged stool to kind of peak performance, those
Mm-hmm.
3 domains.
Yeah. This is really interesting, and I really appreciate you sharing the story. I think this is really interesting, and I think a lot of people can relate to that a lot. I want to go back there for a second one more time, because I think it's just so fascinating on how that all happened. Where were you working at the time? Oh,
So that was with the restaurant chain.
with your restaurant chain. And can you like pinpoint today any specific things that you did incorrectly? Like what led to that point that you were sitting on an airplane getting a heart attack?
Yeah, lots of things. One was just the sheer, number of hours and time spent working. It was just constantly working. I carried what developed the unhealthy approach to work that I developed at McKinsey. I carried into Skype, carried into my own business. When I was within my own business that I had started from scratch, it got really bad, because then there was no containment to me, right? It was just, you're at the top of your own kind of kingdom in a way, right? And entrepreneurs, you have this insatiable desire to build and create and kind of succeed. And it just became relentless. And then that coupled with not getting enough sleep, not getting enough exercise, just was not looking after my health. And there had been warning signs actually before that. I had had a shoulder surgery. It was about like a year or so prior to that. And I remember coming out of the surgery, and one of the nurses going around after you're coming out of a general anesthetic, and they're just kind of checking, right, doing the normal checks. Okay, is everything returning to normal? Does it look normal? And she was taking my blood pressure, and she took the blood pressure, and then I remember hearing her go, huh.
Okay. It's not really what you want to hear when you're like laying in a hospital bed.
And I was like, why'd you go, huh? And I didn't know anything about blood pressure at the time. She's like, let me just take that again.
Okay.
So, and she takes again. She's like, yeah, it's a little high. And she's like, which I'm surprised, at your age.
Yeah.
Because I'm 45 now. This is at the time of all this, I'm 35 years old.
Yeah.
And so that was like the first time. And then I started to, just feel different sensations during that year. And, sometimes I feel a little bit off and palpitations and just a general feeling of, being unwell. So yeah, there were warning signs. It didn't come out of the blue.
Of course. Yeah. But
when
we are
you're
really good at ignoring them, right?
Yeah. And when you're 35, you think you're invincible.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, it's like that kind of that age where, 25, you're kind of like, you think you're invincible, but you don't really have like a lot of, wisdom yet. At 35, you've gotten a taste of that wisdom and you think you're invincible. So I think you're quite dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, but
how many
yeah.
years in total were you in corporate? So McKinsey and Skype?
Well, Skype, I wouldn't say. It was very entrepreneurial when I was there. So this is like the very early days of the company,
Mm-hmm.
like forming it, still. So McKinsey was the only time, I was in a more corporate setting.
Interesting. Okay.
Even though that was like consulting, and that was 3 years.
Okay.
So then that prompted a decision to, after that conversation with my wife, I started to get a lot more serious about how do I show up at my best,
Mm-hmm.
in each of those 3 areas.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I grabbed my phone and I put 3 alarms into my phone, and I basically thought of my day as being segmented into 3 parts, not cleanly or perfectly segmented, but essentially 3 parts that are powered by, either it's a health focus, a, wealth or a work focus, and then like a home or a family focus. And I just thought of, okay, well, what would be me at my best in each of those domains?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to set an alarm so that I see that best self identity pop up on my phone right before each of those segments in my day. And so at 6:30 a.m., I put in an alarm. And this is why the new book I've written is called The 3 Alarms. It's all about this, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So 6:30 a.m., first alarm goes off and it says World Fitness Champion. I am nowhere close to being a World Fitness Champion. I worked my tail off to make the basketball team and never played a game.
Okay.
I've always tried hard athletically, but never amounted to much. But that's not the point. The point is that's the version of me who goes to the gym in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
I operate from that vantage point. The thought of not going to the gym is like kind of like silly. It's like, well, would a world fitness champion not go to do their exercise? Of course not.
Mm-hmm.
They would do it whether they feel like it or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And 9 a.m. the next one goes off. It says world's best. Well, it used to say world's best CEO when I was a CEO. Now it says world's best coach.
Mm-hmm.
Again, just to prompt me to think, well, how would that version of me show up for the day ahead? And then the game changer one for me is at 6:30 p.m. It says world's best husband and father, just to prompt the question, well, how would the world's best husband and father walk through that door right now? And so it helped me bring a lot more intentionality into each of those 3 areas.
Mm-hmm. And you did say that at the beginning, when you had the heart attack, you actually started to change things in your health. What was that process like? Because you said one part already started, but I think it's really interesting that it's not just about health. It's like really about all of these different components and how we show up in each of them. So how did the whole journey start there from a health perspective?
Yeah. So I did quite a few things. One is I started to prioritize sleep. I used to basically not sleep. Like very rarely would I sleep 8 hours. I would sleep, 5 hours, 6 hours. Sometimes I would have nights where I would sleep an hour and a half, which
Wow.
isn't sustainable. So I started to prioritize sleep. Started to go to the gym regularly, and really changed up my diet, a lot. So started to eat, kicked out, the sugar, refined carbohydrates, like processed foods, like all of that. And then did some detoxes as well. So basically didn't have any like beers or wine, and then that was actually so interesting doing that I did that once for 3 months. Then I tried another one for 3 months, and then I got to the point where the whole social dependency on like having a beer or a glass of wine when you're interacting, with others, like at a dinner or wherever, that just suddenly just like disappeared, and so now I don't drink at all. And that helped as well. And then the last piece I would say is learning how to meditate. So just really calms the mind and makes it so that when you are working, you're working feeling more focused and less anxious. So I think all of those things really came together. It was not like one thing, it was like a myriad of things.
Of course. And obviously, as you said as well, over a course of time, which I think is really powerful to say, because people always assume that we just change everything right away. But you said you did that in these like 3 months increments to probably create like more sustainable habits. And so when somebody is listening now to you, they probably think, oh, okay, so big warning sign, something really terrible happened. You really invested in your health. So you should be good. Like it should affect all of the other areas of your life as well. How did it not?
No, because all that I ended up doing without intending to do it was optimize my health so that I could work, even more, or or work without it compromising my well-being, right? And that's different to having an intention and actually checking in with yourself to see, are you also delivering not like what's okay, but your best on the home front as well as the work front? Is what the home front was getting from me at that point in time was the leftovers. And that's not good for anybody, right? It's not good for your partner, not good for the kids, not good for yourself either, because ultimately, because but even if when you're not doing your best, even if nobody's saying something, and even if you're not saying, you're not doing your best. And I didn't realize actually how fulfilling things would be when you define what best looks like across all those areas, and very intentionally try to show up that way. Like at first it might feel daunting, or, oh my gosh, that feels exhausting. But I'm not saying show up perfectly. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying show up so that you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I'm doing a good job here, rather than just on cruise control.
Yeah. Another question I have that pops in my mind is, when somebody's listening now and they work in corporate or they work in consulting and they really identify with your profile, right? Like lots of hours, very ambitious, thrive through success and work. And then they hear, okay, that mindset shift. How did that happen? I mean, obviously you said, you had that conversation with your wife and that was kind of an eye-opening moment for you, but then there's still the work, right, that you have to do, because it's also a habit and just a certain way, I'm sure, of like your character, of how you perceived work. And up until this point, right, you were 10 or 15 years working that way, and you had that kind of mindset to just go after it and be persistent. And if it had to be, work yourself to the ground in order to see the success. How do you shift that? Like, what needs to happen there?
Yeah, there was a few things. So one was, obviously that conversation with my wife, led to me thinking this would be, catastrophic. There's no way I can let that happen. Mm-hmm. And then a hugely important mindset shift for me happened when I read this book, Turning Pro, mm-hmm. by Stephen Pressfield. Have you heard of it before?
No, I have never heard of it.
And I was so fascinated by it because he presents the definition of an amateur versus a professional, and basically challenges the reader to make a decision. Are you going to remain an amateur in your life, or are you going to turn pro? Mm-hmm. And there's lots of different ways in which he describes the difference between a professional and an amateur. But one of the ways I like to think about it is, and I don't know if he exactly described it this way or if this is my own kind of amalgamation of what he was saying, but a amateur needs to feel like taking action, needs to feel like doing something in order to take action. So an amateur looks at feeling as generating action, whereas a professional takes action whether they feel like it or not. Or thought in another way, a professional knows that action generates feeling. And that was a massive mindset shift for me, because instead of thinking that I was being led by my emotions and feelings, I realized that actually I could create and generate my emotions and feelings. Mm-hmm. And that works really well with trying to show up, more intentionally at your best to do better, because often you don't feel like doing that. But suddenly with that shift, you don't need to feel like doing it. What does that have to do with it? It's like, that's an amateur way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And I started to prove that to myself, that if I just took action, whether I felt like it or not, I would start feeling, I'd start feeling good for taking that action. So that then led to me coming up with this thing. I refer to them as champion proofs. So let's say that each of those versions of you across health, wealth, and relationships, those best self versions of you, if they're the champion version of you in each domain, then you need some way to prove or evidence that you are being that version of you on a daily basis. And so I started to just challenge myself to, on a daily basis at the start of the day, think of what's one thing I could do health-wise, wealth or work-wise, and then, home or relationship-wise, such that by doing it, it would kind of prove I was being that identity, the identity that I have in each area. Mm. And then I would just take that action. Like, no matter what, I would make sure at least I did that one thing, whether it was getting that presentation, done and off, whether it was burning 700 calories on the stationary bike, whether it was something as simple as, telling my wife that I love her, or, playing a board game or a video game, with one of my boys. They like the video games more.
Of course they do.
So do I, actually. So, yeah, so that's quite powerful when you start to do that. Mm-hmm. Because you look at, it's about creating a new identity for yourself, or new identities for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the etymology of the word identity, it comes from two Latin words that mean repeated beingness.
Mm-hmm.
And so an identity is nothing more than you acting repeatedly in a way that's consistent with that identity,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like if you want to be the world's best spouse and parent, well, then have that as a identity goal, and on a daily basis do one thing, which may feel like a big gap from where you are and what that identity is initially. But by repeatedly on a daily basis doing stuff that's in congruence with that, suddenly that gap narrows, and
Mm-hmm.
you start to feel that you are that person, or at least closer to being that person.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, lots of things came together there, to
Yeah.
make.
Yeah. And I'm also curious about the work piece, because I feel like, again, you said before you worked so many hours and, you prioritized it, it sounded like, and I'm sure it's true, work over everything else, right? Um, how did that translate into work? What did you do differently there to maybe still get a lot of things done, or to still focus on the right things in order to be wealthy in your work life and still take care of all the other things that are equally important for you?
Yeah, one of the things that I hadn't fully appreciated, or no, I did appreciate it, but I didn't have a way of overcoming it. Um, so a lot of my effort in my earlier working years just came with a lot of pain, because I was just a horrible procrastinator. So I would produce good work at a high quality,
Mm-hmm.
but be way too perfectionist about it, which is just, another form of procrastination,
Mm-hmm.
or keep putting it off, or be distracted far too easily during the course of my work. So what could have been done in, an hour would take 3 or 4 hours, or sometimes I would just put things off.
Mm-hmm.
So getting a handle on that was like massively important for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's a variety of simple tools that I used. One was just replacing the language in my head with, every time you feel the urge to procrastinate, if you were to verbalize what you're saying in your head at that moment, it would go along the lines of, I have to finish something, or I should be doing something, which those are like fighting words, they're going to prompt resistance. Because if you have to do anything, you're going to want to resist. And I came across a great book written by a guy named Neil Fiore called The Now Habit. And in that book, he suggests that you just change the language to from negative self-talk, like I have to finish, to more positive self-talk, and just simply focus on I choose to start. So instead of I have to finish, I choose to start. And then I just add a little piece on the end. I choose to start for just 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And that, how long does it take to start something? Well, it's like a nanosecond versus finish, which can feel overwhelming. So that helped a lot. Just constantly being aware of when I felt the urge to procrastinate, and then change the way I was talking to myself in my head. The other thing that I noticed was that at that time, during the course of a day, jump around to lots of different things throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
So I might start working on something at 9. By 9:11, I'm now researching something on Google that's related to something I was working on, which then leads me to checking LinkedIn very quickly, which then leads me back to my presentation. I've lost my place. Okay, where was I? I'm now, back where I was. I start working for a little bit longer. Now my coffee's cold. I go reheat that, come back, work on the presentation. Suddenly a notification goes off in Slack. Now I'm looking at that. And it's, the amount of time actually spent doing what I had wanted to do was minuscule and compared to the intention.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to timesheet, like a lawyer does. I did it for a bit of time, like, okay, when I work on an activity, let me just force myself to write down every time I switch to, an activity. And just the act of doing that made me hyper aware of where my time was going and how often I was jumping around and switching things. And there's a startling stat I got to throw into this one here, which is that, so in the book, The One Thing, they talk about some research. I think it was out of Stanford University, looking at how much does task switching cost people. And it's about 28% of their workday, which I then took and said, okay, let's take a 52-week year and let's subtract 6 generously for vacation. So 46 weeks times a 28% loss. Well, that's 13 weeks, which just so happens to be a calendar quarter. So that means that the average person, unknowingly, because of the way they jump from one thing to the next during the course of their day, loses an entire quarter every year. And during a professional career, that extrapolates to an entire decade. So what could we do with an extra decade? And the solution to that is learning how to single task, like really work on one thing at a time, which if you timesheet your day and do that for, a week or two, you can develop that awareness to not jump around so much and really focus, for the extended periods of time that you need to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Stanford, it's actually, I haven't heard about that research, but Stanford also has a study that it takes around 23 minutes to go back to a task when you got distracted by something else. So if you've been working on a presentation and then you get all these distractions, it will actually take you 23 minutes, takes your brain 23 minutes to really focus on where you were before. So that's a lot of time as well.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting calculation too.
So that's that. Another. I mean, it's shocking, right? How much time we lose. So a lot of people, but I think the majority of people, me included, vast majority of people, if the average person is doing this, what we've just said, then it would follow that the majority of people who are burning out less because they have too much to do, and more because it's their own fault, because they are working way too inefficiently and they're losing an entire quarter every year. If we're playing a game of basketball and suddenly you get told, oh yeah, and
the
sorry,
fourth quarter first.
yeah, I forgot to tell you, but for this fourth quarter, yeah, you can't play, but the other team's going to continue playing, and you'd be like, well, huh? Like I don't have any chance to win. No, you don't.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect example, and I love that idea. And so now you work as a coach. You work, I assume, a lot with CEOs and leaders. What do you see their biggest mistake to be in achieving their peak performance? Is it these 3 areas, or can you even pinpoint it more to maybe one of them?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really depends on the person. I mean, what I focus on when I'm working with somebody is 3 pillars in parallel. So one is we have to build a better you. So we need to get the person operating at their best, not just in the work front, but also health and home fronts, and working as productively as possible. So that's all the peak performance stuff. The second pillar is around leadership, because you don't need to be a CEO to still be able to benefit from being a strong and a good leader. Right? And that affects everyone, even if you're just working within a group with peers. And so some clients really need help on the leadership front. So how can they become more decisive? How do they become more reliable? How do they step into having difficult conversations better? How do they just lead themselves better? Whereas others may gravitate more towards needing help on the third pillar, which is how do they scale their business if they're an entrepreneur, or their organization if they're working within a corporate, and they might need some thought partnership around strategy and execution and things like that. So it really just depends on the person. But I think it ends up being one or a combination of those three things.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And I didn't really ask you this question at the beginning, but I'm still really curious to hear about it. You were born in the US then,
Yes.
but your dad or mom was Norwegian, so
Yeah.
that's why you grew up bilingually.
Yeah. So I was born in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
My father Norwegian, my mother American, and then we did that, or they did that for the birth, so that the American citizenship just happens by default, no issues there. Otherwise, there's a lot of issues with having to get that all organized. Not a lot of issues, but extra paperwork. And yeah, and then we had been in Norway just before that. Then we went back to Norway. I was in Norway till I was about 5, and then my parents split, and then moved to Chicago. And and then my mother remarried in Chicago, and my stepfather, who I also call Dad. I mean, he's actually the guy who raised me from a young age, and that's where I got that last name Partaker, which isn't very Norwegian. So, yeah, so a bit of a mix of things.
Yeah, and then how did you come to London?
So to be completely honest, I was living in Oslo, Norway, because I eventually moved back to Norway, and I got bored of living in Norway
because it's very cold and dark.
Yeah,
prejudice.
Yeah, exactly, and I guess I had spent most of my formative years growing up in Chicago, so I was accustomed to big city living, and so I didn't, but I liked the sense of adventure, and I didn't want to of being somewhere else. I didn't want to move back to the States, and the only reason I chose London at the time, I ended up falling in love with the city, but the only reason I chose it at the time is because I didn't want to have to learn another language, and they spoke English.
Okay,
nice. So really simple.
Yeah. Very nice. Eric, this has been such a wonderful interview. I think you shared so many interesting insights, so many powerful ideas. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. If people are interested to learn more about you or want to reach out to you, what would be the best way to do that? Yeah, 2 things. So one, as a thank you for listening all the way to this point, if you head to my website at Eric with a C, Partaker.com, I'm offering a free digital copy of my new book, which is hit bestseller status on Amazon. So the 3 alarms, you can get that on the website, and it will take you through some of the concepts that we've discussed here. And then if you're an entrepreneur, leader, or somebody who just wants to up their game, I'm happy to talk to you about coaching as well, and you can reach me through the website as well. Great, awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I'm really curious to see what's going to happen next in your life. Well, thank you, Julia. Appreciate the time.